right. Good morning, evening, afternoon, or whenever you may be watching this. My name is Professor Ferrero, and we are picking up in the road to World War II. So, last lecture, you should have watched it. It was over the social impacts and the overall impacts of the New Deal. So, today we're going to be focusing a bit more internationally. I understand that a lot of this isn't necessarily American history, but it is important to understand how World War II started to get to the point to where the US feels the need to get involved. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So let's go ahead and discuss that in US history 1877 to the present. So the rise of Nazi Germany. So in order to understand the rise of Nazi Germany, you need to understand two events that happened really before this. The first is the Treaty of Versailles of World War One. It's going to end World War One. The Central Powers lose, and Germany is functionally blamed for everything. They get hit with a massive, massive reparation debt that they owe. They go ahead and they lose all of their overseas colonies to Great Britain and to France. They lose a lot of domestic territory, leading to the creation of Poland, some of it going over to France. And then on top of that, their military is completely and totally neutered. They are basically just left with a national guard to deal with domestic issues. Europe does not want Germany strong enough to invade any neighboring countries. All of this is going to be, for the most part, okay, because during the Roaring Twenties, the US has plenty of easy money and they are giving plenty of loans to the German people to help keep their economy afloat. However, once the Great Depression hits, the US economy collapses. They can't keep bankrolling Germany anymore. And because of that, the German economy hyperinflates. It gets to the point to where 1 trillion German marks, these are the German dollar, are equal to about 1 USD in 1923. And again, it would have gotten a lot worse, and it did get a lot worse once the Great Depression hit. With the economy in shambles and being humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles, Germany's going to end up looking for a strong leader, and they are going to find it in an Austrian by the name of Adolf Hitler. However, thankfully, since he's not a German, he can't become president. He is going to speak very, very charismatically. He's a very, very charismatic individual. He's going to tell the German people, this is not your fault. This is ultimately the fault of the Jews. It's the Jews behind the foreign powers, behind the Americans, behind the communists, behind the British, behind the French. And this is where a lot of the anti-Semitism is going to start to rise up in Germany. He's going to be inspired by fascist leader Benito Mussolini, and ultimately, yeah, he finds a way around not being able to become president. He functionally is going to annex Austria into Germany, making it a part of Germany, and allowing him to become a president of Germany. This political cartoon right here is a pretty good description of the attitude towards Jews under the rhetoric of Adolf Hitler. So right here, you look, you can tell this is a Jewish gentleman. Go ahead, pause, break it down, think through what it means. So here in back, we have a Jewish gentleman, and notice what flags he's behind. He's behind the American flag, the British flag, and the Russian flag. The caption reads, "Behind the enemy powers, the Jew." Basically, it's making the anti-Semitic argument that, sadly enough, we still hear today, that the Jews control everything, that they are in charge of these foreign powers that punished Germany after World War One. And it's ultimately they're who to blame for Germany's suffering and not Germany itself. So let's talk about the radical ideologies popping up in Europe at this time. You have three main radical ideologies. A lot of people will argue that fascism and communism are opposites. This is my personal opinions. I would argue that they're two sides of the same coin. They might have different goals, but they end up functioning almost in the exact same way. So let's go through each of the three radical ideologies in Europe at this time. First is fascism. It is extreme nationalism and causes a totalitarian government. The emphasis of a fascist society is absolute loyalty to the state. The best example that we have of fascism in Europe at this time is going to be Benito Mussolini. Nazism is the nastier younger brother of fascism. Fascism tends to be racist, but it does not have to be racist. Nazism is ethno-nationalism. Notice that first part of that, ethno, ethnic. It revolves around an ethnic heritage to the exclusion of others. It is another form of totalitarian government similar to fascism, however, it adds elements of ethnic superiority. With Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, which were literally the Nationalist Socialist Party, that's what Nazi stands for, they're going to believe that the Aryan race, which ironically enough, they're wrong for calling the Germans Aryan. They weren't Aryan. The Aryan race, blonde haired, blue eyed Germans, are the superior race. All other races are inferior. Hitler was actually working up a list of most inferior to least inferior. If he had continued, more people would have eventually got put into the Holocaust aside from the Jews, homosexuals, and Romani people. Adolf Hitler is obviously the textbook child of Nazism. Finally, is communism. Communism is another extreme form of government. It's a left wing extreme ideology, and it emphasizes total redistribution of wealth, abolition of private property, and the government is in control of everything once again, except um, as opposed to everything being in service of the state. It's all in service of forced equality and equity. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. All three are totalitarian forms of government. All three do not believe in individual liberties. All three do not believe in individual rights. And that's part of the reason why a lot of Americans get confused with European politics. For the most part, all European politics emphasize big government. Here in the United States, you have people who are very, very liberal and want a small government. You have people who are very, very conservative and want a small government. That left right wing ideology dynamic that you have in Europe doesn't really transplant well here in the United States. Because for the most part, not always, but for the most part, conservatives in the United States tend to be more small government. And you can't get fascism, Nazism, or communism without total government control. So, lead up to the World War in Europe. Hitler is going to invade Czechoslovakia. Ultimately, Great Britain, France, they decide not to do anything. Like a mom whose kid is crying for a lollipop at the grocery store, Great Britain's the mom here. They just say, you can have the lollipop. You can have Czechoslovakia. Just don't invade anywhere else. At this point, the prime minister is Neville Chamberlain, not Winston Churchill. Chamberlain's going to lose to Churchill in large part because of this. So they let Germany have Czechoslovakia. Germany's also going to sign a non aggression pact with the USSR, with Russia. Both countries promise not to interfere with each other and not to declare war on each other as well. Italy is going to invade North Africa, and World War I is officially going to kick off in Europe with the invasion of Poland in 1939. Adolf Hitler is going to respond to an alleged raid by Poland on the German border. In reality, this is just an excuse to declare war on Poland. Russia is going to attack from one side, Germany is going to attack from the other, in a tactic known as Blitzkrieg or White Lightning. There's a video link here in the lesson. I'll be sure to link the video to Blitzkrieg down below in the comments. It's really, really fascinating. It's called Lightning Warfare, and you can see in the video the Germans, they hit hard, they hit fast. Ultimately, after this point, Great Britain's like, all right, we need to step in. The Treaty of Versailles declared that Poland is never allowed to be invaded again. We need to step in and stop the Nazis this time. But by this point, Germany's already taken over Poland. They flip and they start attacking France. And that's basically going to leave Great Britain to be the only country left fighting the Nazis in Europe. Here you have a lovely political cartoon. It's showing off the non-aggression pact. As you can tell, the artist of this cartoon doesn't really seem to think the non-aggression pact is going to last in the long run. And he ends up being right. Pivoting to the East. World War II, unlike World War I, isn't just fought in Europe. It's also fought in the Pacific Ocean. Japan had been an imperialist power along with Europe for a very, very long time. Leading up to World War II, Japan's functionally a military dictatorship led by this gentleman right here. Although I don't know if I should be calling him a gentleman, Hideki Tojo. Many historians debate whether or not World War I officially starts with Japan's invasion or with Germany's invasion. I personally think it starts with Japan's invasion of China and the raping of Nanking in 1932. Japan is a island country. They're very, very limited in natural resources. Because of that, they start invading neighboring countries like China. They'd taken over the Korean Peninsula about 20, 30 years prior to this already. In the raping of Nanking, they are going to kill 150,000 POWs. That's not active soldiers, these are POWs. These are soldiers who have been caught and captured. They pose no threat, and Japan is going to kill 150,000 of them. On top of that, they kill another 50,000 male civilians. These are not soldiers. And the reason that this tragic, horrific event is called the Raping of Nanking is because 20,000 women and girls are going to be raped in this horrific event. A lot of people in World War II are always talking about how bad the Nazis are, but Japan was arguably just as bad. Many of these girls and women are going to die during the violent act. Japan, throughout the 1930s, is going to be expanding out into the Pacific Ocean, looking for more resources, looking for more territory, and taking over a variety of islands out there. Ultimately, it's only a matter of time before Japan's going to have to bump into the United States, which is where we'll be leaving off in this lecture. You can see some wartime propaganda here of FDR. There's a lot of racial undertones here. People of Western European descent by Japan were often depicted as with racist undertones, showing them as monstrous and hairy. Stereotype of white peoples, they tend to be a lot hairier. So that is a racist caricature of FDR. It's World War II propaganda by Japan. And you can just see how much Germany expands in such a short period of time. So this is 1938. This is what Germany owns. And then the Germans plus the Italians, all of that in blue is what they had managed to conquer by 1941. They basically take over all of France, they take over Poland, and they start invading the USSR as well. The USSR, though, isn't going to join until 41, so there's functionally 2 years where Great Britain is the only one sitting there fighting against Germany. And you can see Japan here as well. By 1938, before the bombing of Pearl Harbor, they have all of Korea. They have massive chunks of northeastern China. They have Taiwan. And after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, they're going to take over almost all of Southeast Asia. I think that might actually be all of Southeast Asia, depending on how you count it. So how does the US respond? Initially, the US is like, we don't want any part of this, especially after World War I. That was not our fight. We got dragged into it. We don't want to get dragged into it again. FDR, though, does want to help Great Britain. To most Americans, the war is far off and distant. They're like, it's not our problem. That's way over there. We don't need to bother with that. The Lend-Lease Agreement is going to get passed in 1941, though, so the US can kind of start helping out the war effort. The US is going to lend weapons to their allies in Europe, in particular Great Britain and what's left of France. The expectation is after the war is over, they'd pay the US back. Another major step they take that year in 1941 is they put an oil embargo on Japan. They basically say, Japan, we are not selling you any more oil until you stop your war machine, because their expansion is getting closer and closer to U.S. territory of the Philippines and Hawaii. The Japanese Navy is going to rely very, very heavily on American oil. The U.S. is aware that if Germany or if Japan are going to mess with the U.S., it's going to be Japan first. To continue on the US response, FDR wants to do more, but he's kind of limited by public opinion in 1940. 1940 is an election year. FDR wants to win that third term. And again, the US doesn't really have an appetite for war after World War I. He tries to help before Germany invades Poland. He wants to stop Hitler, but again, his hands are also kind of tied by Neville Chamberlain and the French government of just kind of telling Hitler, yeah, you can take Czechoslovakia. Ultimately, the most successful thing he does before the US joins the war in 41 is he does stop Nazi influence in South America. FDR will be elected in 1940 for a third time. He's the only president in American history to win more than 2 terms. He's going to win a total of 4, dying at the beginning of his fourth. Many interventionists are pushing the US to join the war, and by 1940, the US implements a draft for everyone aged 21 to 45. This is the first time in American history that there is a peacetime draft. It's going to lead us to Pearl Harbor. Japan and America both know that the war that is going to happen between them is going to be on the high seas. So, in order to get the upper hand, Japan plans a surprise attack on the American fleet in Pearl Harbor. All of our best battleships were there. The oil embargo is going to raise the tension, and Japan's like, it's now or never. We need to cripple their navy. If we cripple their navy, we'll be able to win this war. And even at this time, the American Navy was weaker than Japan, and they're going to handicap the American Navy quite a bit by the bombing of Pearl Harbor. However, it does very quickly turn around, and I'll talk about that in the next lecture. Ultimately, it's going to be a naval war. It's going to be on the high seas. So December 7th, 1941, there are signs beforehand that there is going to be a Japanese attack. However, everybody kind of assumes Japan, they're not technologically advanced enough to go ahead and attack Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor is a shallow water harbor. There's no way that Japan is capable of making a shallow water torpedo. They come up with it though, and they use a very ingenious way. They go ahead and they actually put wood on the thing so it floats. Pearl Harbor is going to be the single deadliest surprise attack in American history up until 9/11. 2,335 Americans are going to die. Over 10 battleships, or sorry, not 10 battleships, 4 battleships are sunk. You have over 1,100 Americans wounded, and almost 200 aircraft are destroyed. It is a super successful surprise attack. The only reason the US is really able to get around it is because of we're able to outproduce the Japanese. We're able to make ships and airplanes a lot quicker and more efficiently because we are very, very geographically privileged. I am going to leave it down in the video below, but there's a really fantastic video. I believe it's published in 2016 on the 50th, not 50th, 75th anniversary of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. There's a bunch of veterans there. They go ahead, they talk about what it was like. I highly encourage you to go watch it. So the US is going to join the war. FDR is going to give a speech saying this day is going to live in infamy forever. Very next day, FDR asks Congress, can I get a declaration of war? Congress is like, you got it. Hitler had invaded the USSR earlier that year, violating the non-aggression pact. And because Germany, Japan, and Italy all had an alliance, Germany is also going to declare war on the US shortly after Pearl Harbor. I personally think the Axis would have had a reasonable chance to win if they hadn't brought in both Russia and the US in the exact same year. The US and the USSR are going to put them joining is going to put the war into full swing. And here are the two main sides. Your ally powers. There's going to be 5 main ones: Great Britain, France, the USA, Soviet Union, and China. China's probably the least important out of these 5. However, they are still a very, very big player. Along with Great Britain, a bunch of other countries come in through the Commonwealth and who are colonies at the time, such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and India. On the Axis power side, you have 3 main players: Germany, Italy, and Japan. It's going to be Adolf Hitler's Germany, Benito Mussolini's Italy, and then Hideki Tojo's Japan. So these are our 2 sides, and that is going to lead us to our overall timeline. To very briefly recap this lecture, all of this starts off with Japan invading Manchuria in 1932, the Raping of Nanking. 1938, Germany invades Czechoslovakia. 1939, Nazi Germany and the USSR invade Poland. World War II is in full force at this point. 1940, France is blitzkrieged by Germany and is taken over, leaving Great Britain as the only really fighter against Hitler. Early 1941, the US is going to pass the Lease Act in March, the Japanese oil embargo in July. 1941, Nazi forces are going to invade the USSR, breaking the non-aggression pact and bringing the USSR into the war. And then finally, December of 1941, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor is going to take place, and that is going to lead to the US involvement in World War II. So, with all that being said, thank you for watching. Next lecture, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go over the US involvement in World War II. I think it's really important to understand the background before we jump in to just the US being involved. Thank you guys so very much for watching. If you have any questions, please write them down, bring them to class. If you're not one of my classes, please feel free to leave a comment asking any questions that you would like. Leave a like. It's always appreciated. Take care and have a blessed day. Ferrero.